do a little video capture of, I guess, what I know about Israel off the top of my head. This way I can have a starting point of where I am in terms of my understanding, my preconceptions, and then look back on this and maybe laugh at myself or I've realized that I've learned something. So what I know about Israel off the top of my head, I know that it's a very relatively small piece of land that has a lot of historical and political ties to many different cultures and religions. The state of Israel itself, I think, came into being in the mid to late 40s, and then I think back again in the 60s, I think more land was acquired for the state of Israel. I don't know, and I think the land that was acquired, some of that involving the much fought over Gaza Strip, I believe that was in the 60s, and then I know that in 2005 the Israeli government withdrew people from that area of land that was contested. I believe that the United Nations had said that their use of the land was not proper, that it did belong. So I do know that there's a lot of fighting that's been done in this area in terms of who actually is allowed to that specific land. I don't really identify myself with a religion, so it's not something I can really connect to in terms of the religious aspect, but I think the aspect that I can connect to is that where I have lived, I would be very upset if someone came in and said, you need to leave, I'm going to live here now, and strong-armed me out of that. So I do understand that aspect, and I also understand the aspect that where I've lived my entire life, but other people have lived there before I lived there, and so that also creates a bit of my understanding of the struggles that can happen when land is contested for. Okay, so that's kind of off the top of my head the background I have for the situation over there in terms of the political situation. Not much more. I know that Obama and the Prime Minister of Israel don't really get along. In part, I think currently due to the talks and the progress in terms of Iran and nuclear weapons. But other than that, don't know much else. I know that in Jerusalem, it's very conservative, or in Tel Aviv on the west coast of Israel, it's not as conservative, as in it's a hedonist area, I guess. So it's very people can walk around and whatever, and swim top and booty shorts, and that's fine. Where in Jerusalem you need to have your shoulders covered if you're in any of the religious areas. I think one thing that really surprised me, that Ellen, who I'm traveling with Ellen and her family and her grandchildren, the thing that really surprised me about Israel is that it's very there's the Shabbat elevator, which refers to that on the holy day, these elevators are programmed to open their doors on every single floor. So you just are, no need to press the buttons, but you're going to hit every single floor all the way up and all the way down. So I am excited. I hope to see one of those. Because from an engineering standpoint, I find that so amazing that the mechanisms of the elevators have been modified to fit the culture and the religious requirements. And I just think that's really great. What else do I know about Israel? I know that the Dead Sea, you can float on water because the salt content is so high. And yes, you can still drown in the Dead Sea. Apparently, yeah. So you still have to watch children when you're, because yes, you're not going to sink to the bottom, but you can still choke on water and drown. But I'm not sure if I will be visiting the Dead Sea. I haven't sorted that out yet. I know that Ellen and the grandchildren will more than likely not be going to the Dead Sea. So if I do go to the Dead Sea, it will be on a journey that I take alone. But there are plenty of really awesome tour groups and organizations that set up English-speaking tours. Well, I guess they're not really targeted towards me because I don't fit the demographic that. Well, I guess I could. It's just the fact that I'm not Jewish. I don't really identify as Christian either. I believe in a higher power, and whether that takes the form of God or a mathematical sequence that, there is something, but we are not at the level that we can understand that fully or know exactly what it is. At least that's what that's my take on the whole thing. And my parents raised me as a Quaker, so I went to Quaker meeting when I was a small child. The idea behind that is that it was an off-branch from England in about the 1600s, with the idea that, instead of having the sermon, and I guess the priest or the Pope or whoever is giving the sermon, and that is the message of God being relayed to the people, it was instead this idea that a normal human being, you, myself, really anyone, they could, if they spent enough time sitting in quiet meditation, they could communicate themselves and understand this. So the idea in Quaker meeting is that you sit in meditative silence, and if there's a need to speak, people will stand up and voice what they feel that they need to say. I've heard that it's termed Quakers because oftentimes when someone does have the want or the desire, the need to stand up and say something, they often are so full of energy that they sometimes will quake. Thus, Quakers. I think, so I already, I shared this with Ellen back when we were on walks and with my mom and Ruby, and I think the only thing that I really connected a cast iron wood stove, and we'd stay for the last 15 minutes of the service. And I remember one particular morning we went over for the remainder of the service, and an elderly gentleman, I'm blanking on his name, but he was part of the meeting, was going through a very difficult point in his life. I was 5, so I don't really remember the details, but I do remember him standing up and he was crying in front of the whole meeting. That just something, he was asking for, a message or something, but he needed guidance, or there was a blockage and he didn't know how to move past that in his life. And for me, being 5, it's kind of unusual to see, someone with gray hair crying in front of you in public. But I remember what happened next was that one of the smaller children, so much younger than myself, this child must have only been like maybe 12 months old, so still crawling, 12, 14 months old. He was sitting with us in that area. Had been at the feet of her mother, so the mom was sitting there, and this child had been playing with the mom's car keys and house keys. And the child, as this man is explaining that, he didn't know how to move forward, this little girl with the house keys, sucking on them, crawled over to him, laboriously pulled herself up on